Good evening and welcome to the April 29th, 2024 meeting
Recording
of the
in
City of
progress.
Pacifica Planning Commission. This meeting is called to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Berman.
Present.
Commissioner Devine.
Present.
Vice Chair Ferguson.
Present.
Commissioner Godwin.
Present.
Chair Hauser.
Present.
Commissioner Redfield.
Present.
Commissioner Wright.
Here.
All right. Vice Chair Ferguson, would you mind leading us in the salute to the flag?
Of course. Pleasure.
Before we get into administrative business, any member of the public wishing to make a public comment on any item should complete a speaker card and bring it to the front and hand it to staff. On the card, please indicate the agenda item number on which you wish to comment or oral communications for items not on the agenda. Members of the public may also participate via Zoom or dial-in option, the phone number for which is 669-900-6833. Can we please put that on the screen? Once dialed in, enter conference number 811-5615-8241 and then press the pound key. Once I've announced the public comment opportunity for the item on which you wish to comment, press star 9 to raise your hand if dialing by phone or the raise hand function in Zoom. City staff will then identify you by your name or by the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. If dialing in once identified for your turn, press star 6 to unmute yourself. Be sure to mute any other broadcast you may be watching, such as Channel 26 or the live stream. Also, dial-in instructions are now shown on the screen. I will call each speaker, whether in person or by dial-in, for the public comment opportunity. Public meetings are a limited public forum, meaning that there are rules for commenting at these meetings. Comments on non-agendized items must address matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission, and comments on agendized items must relate to that specific item. If comments do not fall into one of these categories, the city will provide you with an initial warning to stay within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city or on topic. If the warning is not followed, I will direct the city clerk to cut off the microphone, and throughout this warning system, I will seek the assistance of the city attorney in identifying comments not related to the agenda item or not within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. So that brings us into administrative business. I do not have any speaker cards for administrative business. Are there any folks on the phone for administrative business? Not oral communications yet, just the admin business.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the approval of the order of the agenda. I actually have to recuse myself from public hearing number 3, and I was wondering if the commission would consider moving the annual report ahead of public hearings.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, let's please vote.
That motion passes unanimously.
Fabulous. Thank you, everybody. We do not have any approval of minutes or designation of liaison, so that brings us now to oral communications, and I have one speaker card. So, Cliff, if you would come to the podium, please, for your 3 minutes.
Good evening. Good to see you all here this evening. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Cliff Lawrence. I know there's no way for you to confirm for me that 1 week from today we're going to continue the hearing on the quarry. I know there's some anticipation on that, at least there is on my part. Aside from that, other news, have you heard that SB 9 was rejected for charter cities? And the regards for the rest of us, there's going to be an appeal, and there's the possibility that it could also be ruled unconstitutional sometime in the future for the rest of us. Other than that, we had an update this week on the active applications spreadsheet, which I'm a fan of. And just give you, since we're going to get into the statistics, I thought I'd share these with you. For SB 9, we have 9 applications. For SB 35, we have 1 active. And for SB 330, we have 5 active. But also kind of interesting, when I look at the square footage on single-family homes, 2,800, 3,400, 35, 33, 22, 28, 42, 29 hundreds. But yet, if you look at Realtor.com, no commercial intended, and you take the data that they provide at the end of their listings, our average square footage using just what's listed is 1,405 feet. Are these applications for Pacificans? Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. That is the last speaker card I have for oral communications. Do we have anybody on Zoom or on the phone with raised hand?
We do not at this time.
Okay. So with that, we will move on from oral communications to consideration items, which is number 4. Thank you, everyone, again, for moving that to the beginning of the agenda. So this is consideration of the annual report to City Council for calendar year 2023. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Planning Director Christian Murdoch. The item before you is a requirement by the City Council for commissions and committees in Pacifica to prepare an annual report to be presented to the City Council on the commission and committee activities for the prior calendar year. The staff report includes an attachment with a draft report that incorporates the prior meeting template as well as additions to that template made by the commission in prior years. And so the request of the commission tonight is to discuss that proposed report, make any modifications or revisions or suggestions to the format, and then identify one or more planning commissioners who would attend the City Council meeting to present on behalf of the Planning Commission. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for staff?
Christian, I have one quick question for you. In reading that over, I noticed there wasn't a listing of how late all our meetings, all our 19 meetings ran. And I was wondering if you thought it would be useful to include that information to give council kind of an idea more than they already have of what it is that we do here.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. I think it's an interesting idea. I'd say in years past, some of the changes like public comments on topics not on the agenda, that was a mechanism for the commission to communicate the important work that the commission was doing in terms of providing an outlet for the community. I think it's another helpful data point to describe the commission's work. I think there are some years, and this may be among them depending on your perspective, where maybe the amount of items or the number of items is fewer than in prior years, but the complexity of many of those items may be greater, and so it might be a way to offset, not offset, but to describe a fuller picture of the commission's work and the amount of community engagement and involvement potentially in some of those items. And so it's a data point we can easily pull from the minutes to put into the report if that's something the commission would find helpful.
If it's not too burdensome, I think if you think it would be useful, I would support that as an idea. Additionally, I noticed that you had mentioned some of the things that we're looking at doing. I didn't really get a good sense from looking at that what you thought the amount of time commitment was going to be in regards to some of those. And I don't know how you would work that into the report anyway, but I do appreciate that forward look as well, and any more information that you think pertinent that could be added to that would also be appreciated.
Are you referring to Section 7 of the report, the City Council Strategic Plan items?
Yeah.
Sure. I can think more about that. I mean, at this point, I think we're just trying to connect for the City Council their priorities and goals and strategies relative to the Planning Commission's work to show that direct connection. Beyond that, it's more of a staff level implementation activity to prepare the work plans and to figure out what part of the upcoming fiscal year or years those items will be undertaken.
Then I'll keep my big nose out of it. Thank you.
Commissioner Berman, did you have?
Sorry, my chair hit the button.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for staff before I open it up to public comment? Okay. I do not have any speaker cards on the annual report. Is anyone on the phone or on Zoom?
We don't have any raised hands on Zoom right now.
One more quick comment.
Wait, okay, so with that, I'm going to close public comment.
Okay.
And I will yield it to us for deliberation.
A sincere thank you to all of staff for all that we did this year. And while this report reflects some of that in its totality, it doesn't even come close to capturing all that you did for this community. And a heartfelt thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wright.
Okay, so I think now we're at the point where we should, decide if there's anything that we want to add or change in item A, I think it is. Is it item A? Yes, attachment A. And then we also need to decide who is going to attend the meeting, which is, I believe, May 28th. Is that correct, Director Murdoch?
Allow me to double check my notes here in the report. Apologize. May 28th at 5 p.m. That's
Okay.
correct. It's a Tuesday meeting in light of the Memorial Day holiday.
Okay. And it is unusual that the chair not attend, but I have a professional hearing that same time. So I think we probably need 2 to 3 folks to volunteer.
I have a vacation that week unless we can reschedule to a different meeting.
I believe if history serves as a framework, that all of the committees and commissions go on one evening. So,
Ordinarily, I would volunteer, but in this particular case, I have a graduation to go to. Let me check my flight schedule. It's a long way away.
okay.
If I can, I will be like the third alternate.
Commissioner Berman?
Typically, Planning Commission is one of the first presentees. Is that correct? Or is it possible to request to go first?
I mean, if there's a challenge identifying a liaison, I can certainly forward that request to the city clerk and the city manager. I cannot assure you tonight, what order the presentation will take. I also want to just remind the commissioners that remote participation would be an option, while not ideal. If scheduling is a challenge, that may be an option for one or more commissioners as well.
Yeah, and I've attended a few of these in the past, and I'd be happy to volunteer with a very strong preference to go earlier. I actually have a class that starts at 8 p.m. remotely, and I'd prefer to not miss it.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. We appreciate it.
I don't want to add to the cacophony of excuses, but I will be on maternity leave. I'll be 2 weeks out from giving birth, so I don't want to commit. But if you really need an alternate and we're in a really tough spot, I'm sure I could, dial in remotely, so that's definitely still an option.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Godwin, can you be number 2?
Yes, I can
Oh, yay.
volunteer.
Okay. Thank you, guys. So, all right, we have Commissioner Berman and Commissioner Godwin with Commissioner Wright as a third alternate. Good?
That's great.
Okay.
In terms of the Planning Commission attendees. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Did anyone have comments or, items that they wanted changed? I did appreciate that the comment we had from last year was kind of already in the format.
Just to confirm, Director Murdoch, we don't have to necessarily commit to exactly what's shown in the staff report right now with our motion to approve this annual report, right? There's still some flexibility to make adjustments the weeks leading up to the presentation?
So I would say the content of the report is what needs to be confirmed tonight. If you're referring to the presentation slides, I think they can be slightly different as long as the information's not different and maybe just convey some additional context or themes associated with the Planning Commission's
Additions.
work.
Could we add content to just, I know in the past, we've added a few slides, for example, with some additional content. Is that acceptable?
Right, I think it's fine. So I'll be forwarding a written report pending the Planning Commission's action tonight, and then the slides will be the visualization to deliver the report. So it doesn't have to be precisely limited to this content if that's a concern. But we won't be able to add to the report after the Planning Commission takes action on it,
Right.
the written report.
Right. Okay, then I don't have any additional comments.
I actually didn't know until oral communications that we did have an SB 35 application. Is that something to highlight, since it is kind of in a similar vein as the SB 330 applications in the bottom of page 1? Do we want to add that we have an SB 35 application, or is it not far enough along?
I mean, to me, it's not notable, but if that's something that the Planning Commission wants to highlight, I don't have an objection.
I agree with Director Murdoch, especially because a lot of these bills and laws actually mean that development doesn't even come through the Planning Commission. So I would err on the side of not including it.
And just one factual correction. A notice of intent has been submitted for filing an SB 35, and it occurred in calendar year 2024.
Okay,
it would
so
be
it's not
outside of the
applicable.
reporting period.
Okay, so we could think about it on next year's report. Okay. Is there a motion to accept the report?
And Chair, Commissioner Wright had made a suggestion about the meeting end times, adding that to the report.
Can I
Yeah.
speak on that? I will make a note to verbally mention it if that satisfies you, Commissioner Wright. I was thinking it might be a little more fluid if I just kind of mention it naturally instead of having a slide on it.
I'd be fine with that as a compromise solution if it's acceptable to Director Murdoch.
No objection on my part. I just need confirmation of the written content of the written version of the report.
So I think I believe we're saying the written content is not going to change, and I believe Commissioner Godwin was about to make a motion to that effect.
Yeah, I move we accept the report as written.
Is there a second?
A second.
Please vote.
It looks like we may need one more vote. Or the light is nearly burned out. It's hard to tell. We'll see. All right, great. Thank you. That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then that takes us back to the top of our agenda, to new public hearings. So we'll start with file number 2021-021, Coastal Development Permit CDP-431-21, and tree permit TP-7-24 to demolish a soil remediation system at the former Olympian gas station. I believe the recommendation here is for a continuance based on the owner's request, so I don't believe we need a staff report.
That's correct. Just
Okay.
the recommended motion in the staff report packet.
I will open, unless the city attorney advises me otherwise, I will open public comment on solely the subject of the continuance.
Yes, that would be appropriate. Thank you.
Fabulous. Okay, again, do not have any speaker cards, so unless folks are
There are no raised hands at this time.
chomping at the bit, okay. So I'll close public comment. And then I believe we just need to make a motion as to the continuance.
I move we continue the public hearing of this matter to the regularly scheduled Planning Commission on May the 20th, 2024.
Second.
Please vote.
That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, moving right along here. So we're now on new public hearing number 2, file number 2023-017, use permit UP-135-23, and temporary use permit TUP-2-24 for modifications to an existing outdoor commercial operation, outdoor seating area, and temporary outdoor dining in the parking lot area during construction at Taco Bell Cantina. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Senior Planner Stephanie Cervantes. I will be presenting file number 2023-017 for the Taco Bell Cantina. The project site is located at 5200 Coast Highway along Pacifica State Beach. The project site has a 2040 general plan land use designation of retail commercial, a 1980 local coastal land use designation of commercial, and a zoning designation of commercial recreation and coastal zone. The project site is located within the California Coastal Commission's permit jurisdiction. However, the city does have jurisdiction over the general use of the site. In 2018, the Planning Commission approved the use of the outdoor deck by Taco Bell Cantina and the alcohol service on that outdoor deck. That approval also required annual reviews of the operation. Due to the COVID pandemic, 2 out of the 3 annual reviews have occurred, with the 3rd set to occur this year. This project today requires approval of a use permit for commercial activity outside of an enclosed structure and a temporary use permit for temporary use for a period of up to 6 months of the existing parking lot. The project does not propose expansion of the existing deck. The project would remove one of the existing windows and the existing fireplace and replace it with an indoor-outdoor bar. The project would reconfigure the outdoor seating layout. On the deck, the bar would only provide service, no seating. The bar preparation area would be inside of the existing structure. Due to the construction needed within the existing dining area, the applicant is also requesting a temporary use permit to allow outdoor dining on the existing parking lot during construction. The temporary dining would occur under a tent and would occupy 10 of the existing parking spaces. Here is the proposed site plan indicating the temporary tent in the parking lot and the outdoor dining area on the west side of the building. This is the proposed layout of the outdoor deck showing the indoor-outdoor bar, again showing the outdoor bar only for service, not for seating, and then the new configuration for the outdoor and the indoor dining areas as well. The project is consistent with the municipal code, with the general plan and the local coastal plan. The project was reviewed by the fire department, building department, as well as the police department, and as such, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project as conditioned. Thank you. I am available for questions, and the applicant has also prepared a presentation and is available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cervantes. Does anyone have questions for staff?
I just had one quick question. I know in the past, I believe about approximately a year ago, there were some minor violations, and I believe those were all corrected. Have there been any other violations of, I believe those were related to signage and lighting and minor things?
Commissioner Redfield, that is correct. The violations that were discovered during the site visit in 2023 were corrected. There were some additional conditions of approval placed on the project at the August of 2023 Planning Commission. Those conditions have also been met on site regarding additional signage. There's been no violation on site since that date.
And one more quick one. I believe in the staff report it's noted that they have very good communication with Pacifica Police on things, and it's a very good relationship there. So I think that's ongoing.
Yes, during the review of the project, I had conversations with police department, and they stated that the Taco Bell Cantina staff is always very responsive and willing to assist the police department with footage or any assistance that they need.
Thank you.
Commissioner Berman?
In the presentation that we just saw on the screen, there was the plan for the patio layout, but I didn't see that in the staff report. Is there a reason why that was omitted from our agenda packet that we reviewed before the meeting?
There's no reason that was omitted. It must have been an administrative oversight in publication of the report.
Okay. Yeah, I'd appreciate if a little more attention is made to make sure that pretty substantial content that relates to our findings is included in the staff report, because I'm someone that really likes to review the plans in depth, and I wasn't able to do that when I prepared for this. The parking reduction, is there confirmation that the site still complies with the necessary parking count to operate the occupancy that they plan to?
Commissioner Berman, I'm not recalling the exact numbers, but I did look at the required parking versus what they would be removing, and it did seem acceptable. Additionally, the construction's set to only be a few weeks as well, and there is additional parking available both to the north and west there as well for additional coastal visitors. So if anybody's visiting the cantina, they can't find parking, we do have public parking lots as well that they can access.
Those public parking lots, I know the one that's to the north of the cantina, you have to pay to park. Do you have to pay to park to the one to the south too?
Yes.
Okay, so customers would then need to pay to park in order to patron the Taco Bell, when otherwise, if they were able to find parking in the Taco Bell parking lot, they wouldn't have to pay?
Commissioner Berman, yes, if the parking lot is full and they would need to find additional parking elsewhere, they would likely have to pay for that parking.
Okay. And how long is construction anticipated to be? Sorry if it was in the report and I missed it.
I think I heard 6 months.
6 months?
That's at 30 to 45 days for the parking lot.
The permits for permit for 6 months? Okay.
Right, the construction was anticipated, according to the applicant, to be quite a bit shorter than the 6 months. I think the 45-day time range is.
And we do have an applicant presentation after which we'll be able to ask questions of the applicant as well.
I could ask them. When I was reviewing the site plan that was included in the agenda, I was a little confused on which parking spaces will be restricted, especially as it relates to the 20-foot restricted parking requirement in the COAs. I'm fine if the applicant wants to address that, but just, that was something I was confused on.
Yes, so let me go back. Essentially, it's all the spaces to the north. So the tent itself will not occupy 10 parking spaces, it'll occupy less than that, but the 10 parking spaces includes the buffer area.
So every parking stall on the north except the ADA stall will be removed, temporarily removed. How about the stalls just south of the temporary seating?
So based on the site plan, they do meet that 25% buffer. That drive aisle should be 24 to 25 feet. We'll have to verify once the tent's up to ensure.
Okay, so once the tent is erected, someone will be measuring that 20-foot offset?
Yes.
Okay. Because from the site plan, my read of it is that those parking stalls are within 20 feet of the tent. And I'd imagine that drive aisle is less than 20 feet, so I think kind of no matter what, the parking stalls across from the seating would probably need to be removed. I bring this up because if it's going to result in even more parking removal than we expect right now, I think it's something the commission should be mindful about. But we could get into that more later. And my next question for staff, COA 24 was left blank. Was that intended or accidental? Is there a COA that the text was missing for?
I don't believe so. It's likely a remnant of pushing the North County Fire Authority conditions to the top of the bottom or the following page to make sure they didn't split.
Okay, I'll save the rest of my questions for the applicant.
Okay. Seeing no additional Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I had one more question for Planning Director Murdoch. The parking barriers you're anticipating approving, are they going to remove a drive lane adjacent to those parking spaces so the diners are protected under the tent from any inadvertent car use? Or so how much addition of the parking lot is going to be removed by the barriers? If you can guess at this point or speculate.
Right. I think the intention is not to encroach beyond the current limits of the tent. And so if some seating area needs to be compromised in order to ensure the safety barriers are placed within the anticipated footprint, then that would be the outcome. Those barriers can be big or they can be relatively narrow, but we haven't gone through a particular design yet for the anticipated vehicle speeds.
Okay, but they will be under the tent.
I don't know if they will be specifically under the tent, but the idea is whatever the envelope of the tent is, that they would not go beyond that if it were to encroach upon additional parking spaces or the drive aisle.
Okay, well, that clarifies it for me.
Okay. So with that, we'll ask the applicant to make a presentation. I believe Vice Chair Ferguson.
Before we get to the applicant's presentation, was there any discussion of hours of operation in the parking lot versus, I know it's one of the few places open past 8 p.m. in Pacifica, so it tends to be more busy later in the evening than other establishments. Was that ever discussed for something that we're operating in the parking lot?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Ferguson, I couldn't quite hear you.
Was there any discussion of the hours of operation being any different while operating in the parking lot than in the brick and mortar building?
No, it was assumed that the hours would be the same.
Okay, I made that assumption based on the omission. Thank you.
Commissioner Berman, did you have additional questions?
No, that's my chair again.
Okay.
It's like the wrong night.
All right. So with that, we'll go to the applicant. I believe we have a 10-minute available time for presentation, and if you would like, staff can cut you off after 7, 8, or 9 minutes, and then you can save whatever remaining time for rebuttal if you would like to. So please come up, introduce yourself, and then let us know if you would like to reserve time.
Hey everyone, my name is Henry Grieve. I'm representing the Taco Bell Cantina as the operator.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Omar Alfaro. I represent the architect, Core States Group. Okay, so the scope of the work on this project is minor. We are, let me see, how do I go back on this? Shadow sequence. Great. So we're proposing to remove the existing fireplace and the window that is right to the right of that fireplace to make room for an indoor-outdoor bar. The bar itself will be on the inside of the property with plenty of seating, with an awning-style window to the outside. The outside will not have any kind of seating. And let's see. And this is what it will look like from the outside of the building after it is built. And you'll see the awning-style window there with a pass-through counter for serving to the outside patrons. To the right of that, we're proposing a new door and storefront window, and that's basically for egress. What you're looking at is some egress calculations here. We're reconfiguring the furniture on the outside, but we're not adding any more space. And this is the view from the inside. This is the fireplace that's being removed. To the right of that, we're removing that window that is there. The existing dining room will remain as is. The bar equipment will be limited to frozen beverages machine, beer taps, refrigerators, and sinks. On the top there is the existing floor plan, the way it's currently laid out. Right below that, there is the proposed floor plan with seating and seating for the ADA as well. And as indicated before, there'll be some temporary tent in the parking lot, and there are really no other changes to the site that are being proposed. In general, that's the scope of work. I don't know if you have any other comments.
Not right now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think what we'll do is we'll just open the public comment up. How much time is left just for the applicant?
When the presentation stopped, there were approximately 7 minutes remaining.
Okay, we've got a lot of additional time. So I don't have any speaker cards on this item. If anyone in the audience wishes to speak, please fill out one of the yellow cards at the back and hand it to staff. But seeing as that no one is jumping up to do that, I'll just see if anyone is on the phone or on Zoom. And reminder to press *9 to raise your hand.
We have no raised hands at this time.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to close the public comment period. I'm assuming you don't want to rebut. There was no comment. So we'll close the public comment period. And then I'll just turn it back to the commissioners in case there are questions for the applicant. I think now would be a good time to ask those. Commissioner Merman.
I'll go first. My question about the parking spaces that will need to be restricted, I guess, do you have anything to add? So there's a condition of approval that requires no parking within 20 feet of the tent, and understanding that we don't know exactly where the tent's going to go until it is erected. Do you have, at least since you're the design team, do you have a sense of whether or not the parking stalls across the drive aisle will be within that 20 feet?
I don't have that information just yet, but we can work on getting that over to you guys.
Okay.
20 feet plus whatever is needed for that impediment so that people don't drive into the tent.
Yeah, and to Commissioner Wright's point, if it's determined that the parking stalls that are across the drive aisle are further than 20 feet away and further than whatever the buffer zone is from the tent, has anyone on the design team done some type of truck turning analysis to confirm that cars that back out of that spot are not going to hit the diners in the tent? That's my main concern with the parking stalls across the drive aisle. If someone's not fully paying attention, they could back directly into people sitting in the tent.
Yeah, not to my knowledge. Nobody has done that, but like I said, we can get on that right away and try to figure it out.
So can I piggyback on that comment or that question? Would staff be able to put the site plan back up on the screen? So if, because I'm not sure which way everything is going to go tonight, but I think the goal would not be to, be an impediment and have you come back, at least on my part. So if you do an analysis and there isn't enough room, would you be able to / willing to move the tent closer to the building and relocate the ADA parking space and try to figure out how to get an ADA path of travel? Because it seems like if you move the tent to the left, you're no longer, there's no, it's not our job to design your project, so I don't want to be too out of bounds, but I don't know if everyone sees where I'm going with
I
this.
see where you're going. Yeah, and effectively, I think we just want to understand exactly how much, or roughly how much parking is going to be removed during the 6-month construction period, and also the safety of the diners that will be in the tent. What consideration has been put into the placement of this tent with respect to the parking?
So what we looked at was we want to keep that handicap stall, open and active. So we don't foresee any issues with the 20 feet bubbles around our tents currently. But we will look into it further and get back to Stephanie and you as a whole.
So I think that's probably what you want to avoid, because then that means you might have to come back to another public hearing. So what Chair Hauser was trying to get at was maybe we could get to a solution where we all feel comfortable without you having to come back to another public hearing. I guess we could serve.
So let me ask a different question, and I don't want to get in the way of everyone's deliberation, but I personally feel supportive of the idea of Taco Bell enhancing their own structure and making an improvement and having some sort of temporary parking scenario, right? And I think that if we all feel similarly, then the question is, are diners going to be safe? So do we all, let's start with that question. Does anyone have any questions pertaining to, or any concerns with Taco Bell doing a remodel on their building?
I do have other questions related to, in the commission's purview of what the tent's going to look like, but
nothing for the actual structure
Nothing
itself,
for the actual
permanent structure. Does anyone have questions about the permanent structure or concerns about the permanent structure? Vice Chair
I
Ferguson.
have a single question. I couldn't tell from the application. Could you confirm the height of the outdoor bar?
So the bar is going to be staying the same height as the current window that we're looking
Could you
at
confirm what that is?
I don't know exactly right now.
Are you talking about the seal height?
Yeah, the outdoor facing portion of the bar, the height, it looks like
It's 3'1".
30.1?
3 feet 1 inch.
3 feet 1 inch. There's an ADA compliance issue if it's over 34 inches.
As it was last time that I checked, it was 3'1", but we can make it ADA compliant.
If you're amenable to that as a condition of rule, that would be great.
Sure.
just to reiterate what I was talking about earlier, I would have really appreciated these diagrams and the architectural plans for the deck and the bar remodel to go in the staff report, because I would have liked more time to actually look at it. I feel borderline concerned that I'm actually not able to review this portion of the project because I didn't get to review it before. So with that said, from what I see, the couple of seconds it's been on the screen, I don't see any blaring issues.
Did staff have these drawings? I mean, here's the thing. If this is our administrative error, I feel really, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't,
Yep.
I hear you.
I just feel the
hear
need
you.
to say it because it's very obvious that we were not able to review this. And yeah, if it's an administrative error, I'm sorry to kind of poke at this, but I'm not able to do my job if I don't have the information in front of me.
It's fair. Do you have other questions, Commissioner Berman?
I do, but I'm happy for others to go first.
Commissioner Wright?
Are we still sticking to that same frame in terms of all we're discussing is the actual proposed changes in the structure.
That was the goal.
Okay, just so I have a clear understanding, is the actual bar and all the bottles of liquor right on the other side of that window?
Can you speak into the microphone?
Is the bar and the actual bottles of liquor right on the other side of that window? It's hard to tell without the plan.
Say again, sorry, I can't hear you.
Is the bar with the actual bottles of liquor right on the other side of that window?
It is on the other side, but it's going to be protected from the outside.
Visually?
Visually, yes.
Because what my concern would be you're on the ocean side, middle of the night, nobody can see you, nobody can hear people there. It would be mighty tempting for someone to break the window to get access to the liquor. But if you're not concerned about it, then I'm not concerned about it.
My understanding is that operationally, that we're going to have the bottles away from the window when we are closed. So we talked that through internally, and we're not concerned about that.
Okay, thank you. That's it for that portion. I do have other questions about
Back
the
for the
tent.
parking, yeah. Well, yeah, okay. Any other questions on this side of the room? No? Questions on this side of the room? So I'm going to go back to a question, and I don't want to harp on it because stuff happens, right? It's like tech. But did the city have and review all of the drawings that were shown tonight? Has staff, at a staff level, reviewed all of these?
Chair Hauser, yes.
Okay. So then I anticipate like we can add conditions of approval that things be made ADA or ensure that they're ADA, but I believe that's already the purview of the building official. So we can add it. I don't know if it gets us much. I guess so Commissioner Berman, I agree on your concern on the tent. And the reason I'm trying to break this up in such a way is so that we can kind of say, all right, we're all in agreement on the building itself, and then let's talk about the tent and kind of give, particular paths. If there's a lack of comfort on the building, I think we should decide that now before we move on to the tent. I am comfortable that a remodel of this size has been reviewed by our staff and will be further reviewed by our building official personally. But I am one person, so please everyone weigh in here, because I agree, it is really helpful to have drawings.
Generally annoyed, but very comfortable.
Okay.
Ditto.
I have a lot of confidence in staff. I'm also very appreciative to the applicant for having the most famous Taco Bell in the world here in Pacifica. I think it's a big plus to the community, and I support them in improving it.
Okay.
Yeah, I support the Taco Bell's efforts too. I wish there was a bit more detail, but I don't think it's not going to get in the way of me making a decision about the building.
Okay. Were the police, or, I mean, again, there's alcohol. It's a good question that Commissioner Wright asked about the window. Has the security of alcohol through a window been reviewed by staff?
Chair Hauser, yes. So during the review of the project, police department as well as planning staff, we had concerns regarding the alcohol service. It's the main portion of this project. And the applicant responded to all the questions that were asked by planning and police staff.
Okay.
And the project was deemed complete. All the concerns were satisfied.
Okay, I appreciate that. So unless there are more questions or comments on this front, I'm going to ask staff to put the site plan back up. Okay, let's put the site plan back up. So Commissioner Berman, did you have more questions on this and comments on the tent?
I do. And I do want to come back to the parking, but let's go through my other questions first.
Please.
What is the tent material, color? What type of tent? Do you have like a product or something similar to point to? What is it going to look like?
So our idea is, for the tents in general, right? Our idea is to be able to have people come outside and enjoy the weather, right? And have somewhere to go sit while we're redoing the inside. You know, we want to make it as inviting as possible for the community of Pacifica. And if we have to get rid of some of the stalls to the south of the tents for, you know, a better drive aisle, we will. But the idea is to keep, you know, the parking lot clean, the beach clean, the outside of the building clean. But that's our goal.
Do you know if the tent's going to be white or blue?
We don't know what the tent's going to look like yet. We're still at the beginning phases. But this is the size tent that we're proposing right now.
Okay. How is the Taco Bell staff going to monitor the consumption of alcohol in the tent area? Because I know there's concern with people taking alcohol off the premises, and to have alcohol in a parking lot, especially if there's no staff nearby, I feel like that's a prime opportunity for people to just kind of take their drinks wherever.
Totally agree. And, you know, I mean, any which way, right, we have the outdoor area, the patio at the Taco Bell without the tents. So we're going to have staff outside anyways. So I think, if anything, it might ensure more safety is what the goal is.
Okay, because I know when we were reviewing the deck reconfiguration, I think about a year ago, one of the items we talked about was making sure that people aren't freely coming and going from the permanent deck
Right.
with alcohol. And now this situation, even though it's temporary, I feel like people could very easily come and go with alcohol.
Commissioner Berman? If I can just add, so the applicant is required to get approval from the Department of Alcoholic Beverages. Typically, when it comes to outdoor dining that is separated from the main business, patrons are not allowed to carry their own alcohol from the main building to the seating area. It's a California rule. So it would either have to be served by an employee or it would not be allowed.
Okay. And is Taco Bell's intent to have employees bring out the meals, the drinks to this tent area?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any intent to have heating in the temporary tent, like heat lamps? I know there's a condition of approval that says no open flames. I'm not sure if a typical patio heat lamp is considered an open flame or not.
I don't believe that we're planning on that, no.
I'm unsure, but I believe that heating lamps would not be allowed under the tent due to fire code. I would have to double check with the fire department, though.
Okay. I'm going to assume that that is thoroughly reviewed during the building permit process. Okay.
If it makes you any more comfortable, during COVID, there were a number of times that I was up in Calistoga in a number of tents, similar to what I think they're going to be proposing, that did in fact have heating lamps that were approved by the fire department, but it had to do with the height of the tent, how much space was above it. There was a certain amount. But I trust staff to review that to ensure safety. I'm pretty sure that Taco Bell's insurance agent would also be very interested in them complying as well, but I do appreciate the concern.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. And yeah, I'm certainly not opposed to heat lamps in the tent area. If I were a diner there, I would probably appreciate them, but I want to make sure that it's safe.
And just going back on our timeline, I know we're, asking for 6 months, but it's more like 6 weeks is what a real timeline looks like for us to have the tents out there.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, then I have one more question other than the parking, which I'm sure we all want to talk about. This next question I'm pretty passionate about. I've mentioned it a couple times during my 2 terms on Planning Commission. The path in the site plan that is identified as an accessible path of travel is not actually accessible at the southernmost portion. And our general plan identifies that path between the parcels to be an accessible path for pedestrians, and I think, well, at least pedestrians to use. And there's literally just like dirt there. It's not compliant. I would love if this project could make that portion of the path actually compliant, especially because in the site plan, it's stated that it's accessible. Is that something that Taco Bell is willing to do?
I mean, we haven't talked about that at all
Yeah.
internally. I mean, that's a completely separate issue.
What portion of that is not accessible? I couldn't hear you very well. I mean, I know
So-
the southern portion, but.
Yeah, the
what
southern
makes it
portion.
not accessible, without, at this point, I'm not sure exactly what.
It's from a grade perspective, there's too much grade differential from the concrete
Got it.
that is adjacent to the accessible parking stall and the dirt.
Yeah.
It's just like a dirt area with boulders kind of scattered throughout.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure Taco Bell would be okay with,
I think
making that area accessible.
I'm sure, yeah. We don't have anything planned right now on this revamp. But we can look at that internally.
Especially if now, with the parking disturbance, patrons are going to be parking in that parking lot to access the Taco Bell. They will not have an accessible path of travel the way that it is today.
Okay, well then if we need to we can make that ADA compliant if we can get this through.
Okay.
Chair,
Yep.
one thing to note from staff's perspective, certainly support the concept of accessible paths of travel for disabled persons. It is often the case that to make the specific grades and widths that are required, that significant additional excavation or construction work can be required. And so one important permitting aspect to remember with this project is Coastal Commission review is required as well, and that could trigger a coastal development permit requirement potentially, given the proximity of this work to the ocean and the potential amount of grading or new construction that could be required, which could significantly complicate the project for the applicant in that case.
Isn't a CDP already required?
We don't know. That's not a determination the city can make, but I would anticipate it's likely that this might qualify for a waiver from the Coastal Commission. This is in their permit jurisdiction, and so we don't have any input into the coastal development permit requirements.
So sorry, Commissioner Berman, and I'm like jogging my memory on Google Maps right now, but you're talking about the portion where it goes from concrete path of travel to sand?
Yes.
But I think that's on the other property line. I think that's Pacifica.
I don't know if it is. I mean, especially because this site plan shows that the portion that is not accessible, it says that it is accessible, and it's certainly not.
I mean, it looks like it's accessible to the two ADA parking stalls within the site plan.
But then my point, especially with respect to this temporary use permit, is if patrons are going to be parking in the opposite parking lot, and if the intent of this site plan is to provide an accessible path of travel to that parking lot, it's not actually provided.
Sorry if I'm might be like totally missing what you're talking about. But when you say the opposite parking lot, you mean the parking lot on the very bottom of the page?
Mm-hmm. To the south.
Here? This?
Yes.
But that's not Taco Bell's property.
I know. Well, actually, no. Let me come back. I don't know necessarily.
Okay.
Because I don't know where the property line lies. But my point is, if there's going to be parking that serves this Taco Bell on this opposite parking lot, whether or not it's a part of Taco Bell's property, and Taco Bell is depending on the accessible path that is shown on the site plan on the screen, it's false. It's not true, because that goes through sand. So I don't know if the property to the south is City of Pacifica property, perhaps an encroachment permit needs to be pulled. I mean, I don't know the means to the end, but the site plan says that this is an accessible path of travel serving the parking lot to the south where patrons will park. It's not. It's false.
To further on that question, could I ask staff one more time to reiterate if, in the current configuration with the tent, if the amount of parking that's available in the parking lot is still compliant with the occupancy of Taco Bell? Because that may make that whole point mute, because then they wouldn't necessarily be counting on that adjacent parking.
While Senior Planner Cervantes is considering the question about the total number of spaces, I think it's important to recognize the proposed temporary use permit would not alter the provision of accessible parking spaces as they exist today for this operation. And so it's not clear that there is a requirement for them to provide accessible parking spaces off-site, given that they have the 2 accessible spaces shown on the site plan, and they're not proposing to impact those with the project. And there are strict limits in the building code about the types of projects that trigger accessibility upgrades and path of travel upgrades. It's not clear to me the extent to which those may or may not be triggered with this project. That will be evaluated in the building permit stage. But this project's not looking to affect the existing accessible parking spaces on the site.
Then so effectively, if from an access standpoint, whether or not it's a person who needs to park in the accessible parking on the parking lot to the south, there is not a desire or a need to have an accessible connection to the pathway to the south. Is that true?
Well, I think I have some trouble with the phrasing. I think it would be desirable to have the entire city designed to be accessible. I think there are practical engineering and financial challenges with accomplishing that. I'm not prepared to say whether there's a need to have that from the southern parking area in relation to this temporary use permit. What I'm saying is I have no information to indicate any modification to the accessible spaces already present for this operation, which I presume met the applicable requirements when this operation was permitted. And this temporary use permit would not be changing the accessible parking requirements.
Mm-hmm. And has there been a boundary survey completed? I guess.
Not to my knowledge in conjunction with this application.
Okay. I still believe that there needs to be an extension to that path because it's never going to get built. I mean, the general plan says that that needs to be a continuous path. And if the Taco Bell property owner is not going to build it, I just never see it being built. And yeah, the 6 years I've been on commission, ever since year 1, we've talked about that path becoming continuous, and it just, I don't know. But anyways, we could talk about parking now.
Can you think of a way that they could continue with their project, get approval tonight, take this under advisement to consider this at some date future so that we can satisfy?
I would love that, but I think that's staff's decision.
I'm struggling with the nexus to this request that you're making relative to the proposal that the applicants made. They're not proposing to modify this area or to intensify the operation in that area that would trigger some sort of upgrade. We're presuming that some customers may choose to park to the south or to the north, but very many of them may already be doing so or visiting Taco Bell in conjunction with visiting the beach. I don't think we have enough information to really make any affirmative statements about that area other than to reflect its current condition.
The last question I'm going to ask, when the ADA improvements were installed for the property, there wasn't a record boundary submitted or shown in the plans for the new improvements for the ADA stall that's at the south of the property. There's So all the work that's been done on this property, there hasn't been a boundary survey or even a record boundary submitted?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not aware that one was submitted in conjunction with this application.
Okay. We can move on, Chair.
Okay. For what it's worth, Commissioner Berman, and I wholly hear you. On a very quick, title, I'm on title.
Did you pull the title report?
I did. I'm on Fidelity Titles website, and it does look like the issue is on the city's side. And so I would be a fan of asking if city staff could look and see if there is some sort of funding to do that outside of the sphere of this. Maybe we just kind of throw it out there and see if it comes back with a ADA path of travel. But I similarly am having a hard time finding a nexus asking Taco Bell to do it because they are not touching their ADA. I mean, I appreciate that
I'm surprised because then part of the building crosses the property line. I mean, I wholeheartedly, I didn't look at the title report, but looking at Google Earth and just looking at this site plan, if I had to guess where the property line was, I would say that it's probably
not where the property line is on the
farther
street.
south. Where the city parking lot ends is where I would guess the property line actually is, especially if the building crosses the line that, well.
Chair, I think what came up, and on what factual basis, whether survey or otherwise, I don't know, but in the 2018 use permit process, the conclusion was reached that the trash enclosure area in question encroached across the property lines. I didn't refresh my memory specific for this item. I think that since then, they were required to modify that to remove the encroachment. So I don't know if these plans precisely reflect that modification, but the best information at that time was that the property line was indicated as shown on this plan as accurate, and that the trash enclosure encroached beyond the subject property.
Okay, that's unfortunate.
So would it satisfy you that we ask staff to look a little closer at that
I would appreciate that.
as a condition of approval?
I'm sure it cannot be a condition of approval to the applicant.
No, I was saying to staff, not to the applicant. That we ask
I
to look
don't
closer
think
at
it
that.
can be. Yep.
If I can make a comment, we actually did do a lot line adjustment,
Oh,
so that has been resolved.
so then where does the lot line lay?
I'm not sure exactly, I just know that we did do a lot line adjustment to fix the trash enclosure encroaching over.
So then it is very possible that the area that's not accessible is within the Taco Bell property.
I don't believe it is, and I mean, just going to, the proposal that we're talking about, if anything, I think we're not focused on, the southern half of the site plan that we have up. We're more focused on, if anything, the parking to the north, as that's going to be closer to the tents. But, like I said, we're more than willing to find a way where we can, for the safety of the citizens of Pacifica, get rid of some of these parking stalls that are directly across from our proposed tents, if that can get us across the finish line.
And so on the site plan, the black dash line that shows an accessible path of travel, what's the intent of that line? Because you don't have it to the other ADA parking stall, you have it specifically to the southern parking lot. So what's the intent of showing that?
I believe it's just to show the path of travel.
Is this the accessible path of travel that's required to access the public right-of-way? Because each building is required to have an accessible path of travel to the right-of-way. Is that this path?
I'm not sure.
Staff, do you happen to know?
No, we do not have that information, Commissioner Berman.
Okay. So just because we do have another hearing after this, so just to make sure that we keep going, I do think that there were other questions. Commissioner Berman, I think you have does anyone else have another question on this side? No?
I just had one quick question, just kind of going back to the question of the tent. Is pedestrian or customer ingress and egress from the tent area controlled? Or is that an open, besides the vehicle barrier? Clearly, it's on the south side for vehicle traffic. But my concern is just people walking in uncontrolled. You can control an entrance with alcohol, basically.
I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I think, people will find their ways to the tent without walking, through the middle of the drive aisle, just as they would normally.
What side is the access to the tent?
We don't have that information yet.
Okay, so that one, I do think, and I would turn to staff on this, but I think that any outdoor commercial space does fall under the chapter of the CBC that does require ADA access. So I, again, would rely on the building department for something like that. But I do want to make sure that you guys are thinking about the fact that you have a very small amount of space and a lot of stuff to do in it. And it is going to be 6 weeks, so I don't think it's going to be a long time. But I do rely on our building department to make sure that we are upholding the California Building Code. Any other questions? Commissioner Wright.
I assume that when you choose your tent vendor, that they are going to make sure that it doesn't blow away in the wind.
I hope so. That's the plan.
Is your plan to have lighting in the tent?
We haven't talked about that yet. I don't think we're planning on having lighting. I think it's a pretty standard tent that we're proposing.
Because what my concern would be is if you were having light, if you would interfere with the walkway, perhaps create a trip hazard, or if you were going to have a line overhead, that at least you gave some consideration and had a plan that was acceptable to the building department for that. Additionally, I assume you are not intending, since it's so full of tables, to have live music out there. Is that correct?
No, we're not planning on that.
Okay, and then I have a question for the city attorney. Is it inappropriate for me to ask Taco Bell if they would be willing to keep an automatic defibrillator in their premises and put a sign on the beach side of their structure so that in the event that somebody drowned, that it would be obvious to anybody on the beach where they could get a defibrillator to save that person's life?
I think it would be difficult to find the nexus for that, for the permit that's requested, which is the change.
I'm just talking about asking the question. I don't think it should be a condition of approval. It is not their responsibility, but I want to make sure that it's appropriate to ask them if they'd be willing to do that.
You can certainly ask them if they'd be willing to do that.
Okay. So asked.
I don't think that this applies to our proposed.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
So I'm going to pick up on one question that Commissioner Wright asked because it is windy. And again, our building department will do this, but I assume that you guys have structural plans and that there will be footings and that this is not going to be like a bucket with concrete.
Our tent's not going to be blown away. We'll make sure. Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Ferguson.
I have a couple of questions. There's quite a few mentions of vehicle barriers with no description or dimensions or design. Is that just, we're leaving that up to staff's discretion? That's a staff question, sorry.
That's correct. That's an item that came up in my final review of this, and so we didn't have time before publication to vet that more thoroughly with the applicant. But in my opinion, it was an omission that was important to address with respect to the outdoor tent design to protect public health and safety, and if that's at the consequence of some table spaces to ensure the barriers can be adequately placed, that's a sacrifice I was willing to recommend.
I agree it would be 100% a condition of approval that I would not be willing to go without. And I might even go further. I think it says on the south side, to me it makes sense to have vehicle barriers on the east side as well. Anywhere you have vehicles pulling up to a canvas tent with people inside. Anyways, it's already as a condition of approval, but if that just could provide some discretion to staff.
Sure. The condition as it's written does not specify just the south. It just says install safety barriers around the temporary outdoor seating area to protect diners from vehicles circulating within the off-street parking area to the satisfaction of the planning director.
Great. I trust you guys on that front. I guess a question for the applicant. I didn't really understand the previous answer, but I brought up the hours of operation, and we'd said the normal business hours of operation. I believe it's open until 10 p.m., but we're not going to provide lighting in an outdoor tent.
We don't have any plans right now to, so no.
Okay. You might run up against some health department issues with that, but okay. Understood.
Any other questions?
Just to add on, we
Comments?
do have lighting in the parking lot. So.
But not in a tented area where people are eating and drinking. That might be a concern after 8 p.m., you know, when the sun starts to go down. If considering your hours, hearing everyone's comments, it feels as if this is not a very well-baked plan. And it's really hard for us to make valid suggestions for you guys when things like parking barriers, tent design, lighting, the entire driveway, the width of the I mean, it feels like you need to come back. I know you may not want to. I know we're trying to avoid that, but this is really half-baked. Have you guys considered, are you here for comments to put together something more solid that we can totally stamp with approval?
I mean, we came to get it approved today, was our intent.
Okay. So maybe the question needs to be more around, and it's hard to put together an in-depth list of conditions for approval without a lot of this information.
Chair Hauser, staff's also hearing a lot of questions that might affect the viability of the outdoor seating area, the temporary tent. One option, if the commission was comfortable, is to proceed with action on the use permit for the permanent outdoor seating area separately and either continue or take some other action on the temporary use permit component, potentially allowing the applicant to come back later if that's something they're interested in doing, but trying to get a final action of some sort on the use permit for the permanent outdoor seating area.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, Commissioner Redfield.
I had one quick question. You said that you had no plans for any exterior lighting, and Commissioner Ferguson had stated obviously they're open until 10 o'clock, the regular hours remain. Condition 14 explicitly states exterior lighting shall include buffering techniques and all. So that's kind of a missed thing there. So it's in the conditions, and yet you have no plans for nighttime operation in the outside tent.
May I ask staff, this seems like, I mean, I don't want to I agree that there are a lot of questions that we are asking that are safety questions, that are good questions, where the answer is, I don't know. And that is frustrating. And we didn't have drawings, and that is frustrating. I also want to recognize that this is a 6-week, we'll call it 6 months because that's what the permit is for. It's a 6-month temporary tent. And I think the question that I have is, why is this the purview of the Planning Commission versus something that could be done at a staff level at a director's hearing? Because all of the questions that we are asking, they're all valid questions, but I also think from a staff's, I trust that if we deferred this to staff, that all of this would be done thoughtfully to code with safety in mind. And so I guess it's a question for staff. What are our options here?
So if the commission were to take separate action on the use permit tonight, it may be an option for staff. We would need to look again at our code in light of what authority is delegated to the planning director acting as a zoning administrator or planning administrator to potentially take action on this as part of a separate public hearing process, this being the temporary use permit. Certainly the intent of bringing them together tonight was to allow the commission to see the totality of the action in this case, given there is some relationship between the tent and the temporary use permit and the modifications to the permanent outdoor seating area. But they do to some extent, function independently. And so there is an option or an opportunity to bifurcate them. And if there's an opportunity to consider it at the staff level, that would be something I'm open to considering.
Would it be okay to condition it that we approve it based on staff approval of their final safety plan. Is that something that could meet muster and satisfy all the concerns?
Potentially, but I think there are perhaps some unknowns that the commission is still trying to flesh out. And so I'm just not fully comfortable with perhaps figuring out what that safety plan should be.
But if we
tonight.
ceded our authority of that to staff by means of a condition of approval, would that be sufficient to then take that responsibility and take it from us and put it on you?
I think it's codified, right? So I think what staff is saying is we could bifurcate the action tonight. If everyone is comfortable with allowing the remodel to the main building, we could vote on that. And then staff could review the municipal code to decide if the tent has to come back to us, especially because it's in the coastal zone, or if it could be done at a director level hearing. Did I understand that correctly, Director Murdoch?
Yes, for the part that I was able to hear, yes.
And what I'm trying to do is avoid that maybe it needs to come back to us.
I concur, but I think if it's a code requirement, that there's not much that we're going to be able to do with a condition, I think.
And can I just add my opinion on that? I don't see the halfway in between point, because if it's in commission's purview to review this, then I want to review it. And I take pride in what we do as a commission, to where I want to review it for the health and safety of the community. So if it does fall within commission's purview, I think I need to see a revised plan with more information and all these questions answered. But if the tent structure, the temporary tent structure, is not in our purview, I am perfectly happy to defer to staff on whatever may be. But I'd feel more comfortable if it's clearly defined that this is not in our purview.
I don't think I have any information to suggest it's not in the Planning Commission's purview to consider the temporary use permit. The code says the commission shall act, and then elsewhere says that in some cases the planning director can act through an administrative hearing process. So it's typically a judgment call by me to figure out what I'm comfortable acting on at the staff level using that mechanism. And it's projects that I think have a low likelihood of controversy or appeal. I think there has already been a significant enough level of interest expressed by the commission tonight that I would not want to. Knowing what I know tonight, I would not make the decision to hear this administratively, and I would bring it to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Understood. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Godwin, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, just one small point. It seems like there's cars going to be going west of the tent too. So if we're going to put in barriers, it ought to be east, south, and west.
Yeah, I think Vice Chair Ferguson made that point as well, and I think we probably all concur that
And
there's
I
a
may-
safety
Yeah, I
safety
missed that.
component. No, I think it's a good point. I think, so here's the questions that I feel like we've had pertain to lighting, safety. I mean, I think you've gotten all of them. Where's the ADA path of travel to the tent? What's the distance of the driveway adjacent to the tent? Are there railings around the tent? How do people get alcohol? How do people get into the tent? So there's a lot of questions that all seem to pertain to the tent. I don't think very many pertain to the building.
I do have one question that I guess does pertain to the building, especially if we're going to see this as a continuance. Can staff and the applicant take a look at the accessible path of travel that's defined in the plans and tell me why that is specifically defined in the plans? Like, what building code requirement says that that path of travel needs to go from the building to the parking lot to the south? And if within the answer to that question is that there needs to be an accessible path of travel to the end of the property, then I need to understand where the property line ends. So I guess that kind of does pertain to the building.
Okay. Does this require more deliberation, or does somebody want to make a motion? Vice Chair?
I'm going to go out on a limb and just throw this out for my fellow commissioners that I actually trust staff's future discretion here, and it's a tent in a parking lot for Taco Bell for 6 weeks. I'm fairly comfortable. They've been good members of the community. They've been a good kind of a keystone business for our community. When we sweatshirts with their logos on them says Pacifica. I don't want to speak for the rest of the staff, but myself personally, I'm comfortable to approve as is with the conditions as noted.
I would be willing to support that same position.
Anyone on this side?
There's a few issues, but I think, yeah, again, like I said, staff is.
Conditionable. Commissioner Devine?
Yeah, I think that, again, I want to support your business. I want you to improve your building. I think it's great. The tents in the parking lot, it's not great, but that's because all of those parking lots are really freaking tough. The north, the south, your parking lot, it's the whole entire area gets incredibly congested, which makes this difficult when we don't have details and we can make for an easy approval, which is what we all want here, actually, especially for your establishment. So, I mean, if we can just throw in some of those conditions and just make sure we've got the barriers, we've got enough room for people to actually drive and for no ding-dong accidents to happen, like that would be really great.
Commissioner Godwin,
We do have a precedence of barriers at breakers, those water-filled ones.
The K-rails?
They've been really successful with those.
Commissioner Godwin, do you have an opinion?
I'm comfortable with conditioning it.
Okay, as am I. So I think let's go through what we want those conditions to be, since it sounds like we're going a certain direction. And staff, I don't know if you want to start us off.
Oh, it's okay. Well, I'm interested to see if the conditions are going to form to be.
So just from my notes, the only new condition that I noted was from Commissioner Ferguson regarding that the outdoor bar shall be ADA compliant, which is something that is evaluated during the building permit process, but it's fine to specify that if there's an interest.
So let me run back what I heard, and everyone can feel free to jump in or correct. I heard that we would like to make sure that there are protections on all sides where there are vehicles, K-rails, or something of whatever structural stability and safety stability that staff approves.
I should say, obviously allowing access for patrons in and out.
Yeah. Having an ADA accessible path to, again, like I know that that's like a building department thing. It's just that it's not shown on this site plan, where to Commissioner Berman's point, this alternate access is shown, and I don't think that relates to the proposal. So I think we should have had an ADA accessible path of travel shown on this site plan. So let's make sure that we know where that is, especially since we don't have information on where the access point to the tent will be. I think that we also heard that we don't know if there's 20 feet across that drive aisle to create the buffer. And so I would be comfortable giving staff the purview to move the tent within the parking spaces to, so if it has to move westward at your discretion, I would be comfortable doing that. Can
I add? More so my point to that was I want to understand exactly how much parking is going to be removed. Because if literally half of this parking lot is not going to have parking available, is that in compliance with the operation of the building? And I don't, Ms. Cervantes, did you happen to find the information on the parking count requirement?
Yes, Commissioner Berman. So as I was redoing the parking calculations, I recalled why it was odd to me and why there was some confusion. So under our parking regulations, and let me just go back to this code section. Under our code section number of parking spaces required, we have 2 separate land uses that could be applicable to this project. We have one that's called public establishments, bars, restaurants, taverns, and nightclubs. Under that code section, that parking ratio, the building would be required roughly 28 parking spaces. We also have another, which is compliant with what's existing on site now. There is another land use that's called drive-throughs, drive-ins, takeout, and fast food restaurants, which could also be applicable to this establishment, and that parking ratio would actually require 64 parking spaces for this site. So it was unclear to me when I was reviewing the project which parking ratio was applied to the site. So I think based just on the existing layout, it was assumed that it was the first, those public establishment, bars, restaurants, taverns, and nightclubs, that would require the 28 parking spaces.
So with the location of the tent right now, I'm pretty confidently assuming that the entire northern half of the parking lot will need to be removed. So that's both the bay all the way to the north and then the one at the center bay. So that's probably like 20 parking stalls would need to be removed. So there would not be 28 available stalls on the site. Is that acceptable?
So our analysis is that given the temporary nature of this application and the period of time that the tent would be there, that the commission can authorize that deviation with the temporary use permit. Indeed, that's one of the key functions of a temporary use permit is it's allowing some flexibility for a short period of time in order to allow uses that would otherwise be difficult to permit on a permanent basis. One idea from staff relative to a new condition would be to direct staff to review the tent placement and location to ensure the minimum number of parking spaces would need to be removed. Perhaps one way to do that would be to shift this tent to the east so that that 20-foot sphere would be not affecting parking spaces, for example. So there are perhaps some other placement alternatives that could minimize the number of impacted parking spaces given the fire code requirement to not have vehicles parked within 20 feet.
So with that, then I think the condition of approval that discusses parking and parking removal needs to be updated, as well as combined with working with staff to find the least invasive location for the tent that removes the least amount of parking, and then to the satisfaction of the planning director. I personally am not concerned with the amount of parking that is or is not on this site. It's just, my purview on this one is very unclear because there's just not a lot of information. So, I mean, typically looking at the parking removal is within our purview, but there wasn't even a defined number that was clearly understood. So I just wanted to have a clear understanding of the parking impact.
I've got one related one. It seems like another approach you could take on this, if the parking lot is reduced, you could temporarily during construction reduce the number of customers allowed on the site. So it was appropriate for the remaining amount of parking. I also think if we're not going to have lighting in the tent, I'm not comfortable with this business running its entire normal operating hours into the darkness. I think we've got to also consider reducing the operating hours of the business during construction unless they have light in the tent after sundown.
I don't concur with the idea of reducing the amount of customers because I think that's an occupancy question based on the building itself. But I would concur with reducing the amount of operating hours if there's not lighting in the tent to sundown or to whatever hours the planning director finds appropriate during the 6-month span. And they may be different for the first 3 months than they are for the latter 3 months.
I would be okay with at the discretion of the planning director, but when you're saying operating hours, not of the business, just of the tent.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, just of the tent, because the building will have the lights.
I still fall back on the original comment that our vice chair made, and I do have full faith in staff to
Yeah.
be able to sort this stuff out. I do trust them to make it safe for everybody.
Yeah,
And
so I concur.
it's I think, for 6 weeks. And
Yes. And we are relying on you because it's alcohol in a parking lot, so please make sure. Any other comments before we ask Director Murdoch to read back conditions of approval?
I have another condition
Okay.
that I'd like to present. Because this site plan, sorry to come back to this, but because this site plan with an accessible path of travel is identified in this report that we may be approving tonight, I would like to add a condition that staff review this accessible path of travel that's identified in the site plan and confirm that it is not code required to have accessible access at the southern property line.
And if they're going to do that, would you like them to then
Make it
if-
accessible.
If they find that it is actually the city that's non-compliant, that they pass that information on to Public Works or something like that?
If this,
Because from what I'm looking at on the plan, I don't see it as being Taco Bell's responsibility.
similar to if another development had to redo the public sidewalk in front of their property, which is outside of their property line, and in city property, similar to this, if that segment is required to be accessible, then I would like the applicant to pull an encroachment permit to make that accessible. If it's determined on city or state or building code that that segment needs to be accessible, then I think it needs to be accessible. If we don't know and it's kind of questionable, it's really hard for me to approve this site plan included in the staff report personally. But if there's a condition of approval that addresses it and at least staff is able to look into the code requirement here, I would feel comfortable with that.
My concern of that condition of approval would be that it could gum up the works for the whole project. And I thought the intent of what it was we were trying to do was not gum up the works. As much as I am all in favor, 100%, of as much accessibility as possible and as is mandated, I'm not sure for,
I guess with that, I mean, gumming up the works, if it's code required, then during the building permit application phase, then it would surface that it's required no matter what.
Right, which from my perspective means the Planning Commission does not need to wade into that question of accessibility. It's a building code question relative to the accessibility requirements. There are cases, Commissioner Berman, as you noted, when the accessible path of travel to the public way or to the nearest public transit stop requires off-site improvements. What's not clear is if any of the work proposed in this application and effectuated with a building permit would actually trigger those requirements. But that review is done during the building permit phase.
Can the condition of approval be during the building permit review phase, the applicant works with city staff to confirm that an accessible path of travel is not required to the southern parking lot? I mean, to my point, if this project gets entitled with the accessible path as shown, and in the building permit phase, it's determined that, oh yes, oh no, that area is not accessible, you need to fix it, the owner and applicant has the right to say, well, no, we were entitled with this plan. This is how it was entitled. So, I mean, if anything, that could gum up the works.
So Commissioner Berman, I think it's a required part of the building permit review process to evaluate a applicable accessibility requirements, including upgrades if certain thresholds are triggered. I think I would like to leave it in that purview if possible. There is a condition of approval. The project shall comply with applicable California building standard codes at the time of building permit application. It's a very broad statement. We could modify condition 19 to say, including but not limited to all applicable accessibility requirements, if that would address your concern.
That would make me feel better. I guess just to kind of go back to another hypothetical, with that condition, Director Murdoch, being a little holistic in covering accessible code compliance with this project, if we approve this site plan as shown tonight, well, with the conditions that we discussed, if it's determined that that segment is required to be accessible, but it's not currently accessible, does the city have the ability to require the applicant to make that accessible at that time then?
I'd say generally speaking, yes, but there are questions of feasibility that are relevant for purposes of accessibility upgrades. Legal feasibility is one of them. So if this is a situation where the applicant would not be able to obtain property owner authorization, for example, whether it's the city or a private property owner or Caltrans, depending on where the terminus of this is, that may affect their ability to effectuate the improvement. But they would need to demonstrate that to the building official's satisfaction that it was infeasible for them to do it, and then achieve that improvement to the maximum extent feasible.
And this southern property, this property to the south of the Taco Bell property, that's city-owned, correct?
I believe it is. My system's not working to access our property ownership system, but I believe that's the case.
Then with that, I'm going to put my trust into staff in the building department's hands that the plan that we are stamping tonight will be fully vetted with respect to accessibility, in that if that path needs to be made accessible, that the city will have the ability to require the applicant to do so.
Yeah, Commissioner Berman, that's inherent in the building code. I think that's the point that I've been trying to make, is that those questions of detailed accessibility design are evaluated at the building permit phase, and the city takes accessibility improvements very seriously. The commission's not being asked to endorse or improve this plan at a design level tonight. And so if this accessible path of travel is erroneous for whatever reason, it's not a pass to get out of compliance with the California Building Code, including accessibility improvements. And so the commission's being asked to consider the use of this tent on a temporary basis in the parking lot to provide an outdoor seating opportunity during the period the permanent outdoor seating area is closed. If that is something the commission's not willing to do, that's a different question than designing this to a project design level of accessibility design, off-site path of travel improvements, et cetera.
I personally do not want to get into the habit of saying that there's a condition of approval that an applicant must meet ADA requirements, because I feel like that goes without saying. And then if we have a history of approving that condition, and then one staff report gets through that doesn't have that, I feel like it creates its own issue. Everybody has to follow the current CBC, and everyone has to follow ADA and FHA and all of the guidelines that are federal law. So I'm actually not thrilled with the idea of changing the condition of approval that you just read. And I feel bad because we usually agree on everything.
I know.
But I just I don't even, it's not even related to the tent. You know what I mean? I feel like our CASP consultant and our building official will look at this, but I think that the tent has inherent issues that we need to really focus on. And I feel like all of the conditions that we talked about tonight need to be thoroughly looked at, and that those will include what you're talking about, Commissioner Berman. Mm-hmm. But I just don't, I don't know. I think it's getting overly complicated.
What I'm hearing loud and clear, I happen to agree with you, but what I'm hearing loud and clear from her is that she's had a concern about ADA compliance in this particular spot for 6 years, and it's still a concern of hers. And I applaud her for not letting this go.
Well, and
I don't agree with it in this instance, but I applaud her for not letting it go, and I too would like to see this get done at some point. I just don't think this is the right vehicle to do that.
And I concur with that, and I believe that all of our city facilities, I mean, I really appreciate all of the work that's gone into like Manor and Palmetto and all of the work that we as a city continue to do to make our city more accessible. And I wholly believe that we need to continue to do that. And so what I would ask staff is outside of this application, you know, and I don't know if Director Murdoch, you're listening or not. No? Yes? Maybe?
I heard most of the beginning, but not the last 10
Okay.
seconds probably.
So the last part of it is I concur with what Commissioner Wright said, which is I don't think that this application is the appropriate part to do, but I would really appreciate, you know, if engineering and public works could look into this and potentially allocate funds from our capital program for an ADA fix on our property, because it is our property.
Right, I have a note, the commission wanted me to pass that along to the Public Works Director. I will certainly do that. There are many needs for accessibility upgrades across the city, and that's Public Works' job to prioritize those. Another opportunity would be in the commission's action on the capital improvement program that we'll be bringing in June, where the commission's asked to weigh in on general plan consistency. It's not out of line, in my opinion, to maybe add some sort of mention in whatever action's taken on that plan that the general plan calls for an accessible path through this area and that future CIPs should consider the feasibility to upgrade this to achieve accessibility. I mean, there are a number of ways to try to express the commission's concern and support for this outside of the scope of the action before
And
you tonight.
assuming that the staff planner working on the CIP program is here tonight, you have heard this request, and hopefully it's in the staff report. We don't have to ask again in June. So
Have to be a squeaky wheel to.
the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I hear you. So okay.
And Commissioner Wright, I appreciate what you said. Thank you. Well, then, I am going to fight my darndest when that CIP comes to us. So aside from that, I really appreciate the conditions that we pulled together, and really it's about safety for the diners in this tent. So I support the conditions we have defined.
Director Murdoch, would you mind reading those back to us, and then I will entertain a motion if they're sufficient to the commission.
So I wrote down three new conditions. One, applicant shall revise the plans to demonstrate the accessible path of travel to and from the temporary tent. Applicant shall revise the tent placement to ensure it results in the maximum number of off-street parking spaces available for use to the satisfaction of the planning director, and operating hours of the temporary tent shall be limited to sunrise to sunset.
And I think we had one about the safety barriers on any side of the tent where it was adjacent to parking spaces.
Right, we discussed that earlier. I'll read the condition again to see if it's sufficient to address that. I think we don't know the placement and the sides on which
Sure.
would need the barriers. So the condition indicated it's condition number 5, prior to commencement of temporary outdoor dining operation in the off-street parking area, applicant shall install safety barriers around the temporary outdoor seating area to protect diners from vehicles circulating within the off-street parking area to the satisfaction of the planning director.
Got it. I did hear you read that. I did not realize that that was already in the conditions.
I'd like to make one small modification. In terms of the hours of operation in the tent, could we say in the absence of lighting from sunrise to sunset? So if the applicant chose to add lighting to the satisfaction of the building department, he could and then operate during the normal business hours.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Any other comments? And if not, can we make a motion?
So that condition, as I revised it, based on Commissioner Wright's input, would read, in the absence of lighting approved by the building official within the temporary tent, operating hours of the temporary tent shall be limited to sunrise to sunset.
I think that was Commissioner Wright's.
Sorry if my chair hit it again.
That's okay. Would anyone like to make a motion? Vice Chair Ferguson.
I didn't write those conditions down exactly, so I would move that the Planning Commission finds the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act and approved use permit UP 135-23 and temporary use permit TUP-2-24 by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A and as read by Director Murdoch just prior to this comment, and incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, second by Commissioner Godwin. May we please vote?
That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, so that brings us to public hearing number 3, and at this point, I am going to pass it to Vice Chair Ferguson because I own real property somewhere in the 1,000-foot vicinity from this project site. Is there anything else that I need to say on that?
No, that's fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ferguson.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, bear with me. This is my first time acting as chair. And I've paid very little attention for the last 5 years while they go through this process, so. I believe at this time we are opening up agenda item number 3, file number 2023-005, site-specific plan SP 181-23 and site development permit PSD-863-23 for construction of a 3,324 square foot single-family residence with a 460 square foot attached garage on approximately, 5,618 square foot undeveloped parcel located at 327 Beaumont Avenue, assessor's parcel number 009-037-470. Do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Commissioner Ferguson. Good evening, members of the Commission. I'm Brianne Herkusha, Senior Planner with the Planning Division, who will be giving the presentation this evening. The project before you is a request for a specific plan and a site development permit to propose construction of a 3,324 square foot single-family residence with a 460 square foot attached garage to be developed on an undeveloped parcel located on Beaumont Boulevard. The address is also known as 327 Beaumont Boulevard. The project site is in the Planned Development Zoning District and subject to the regulations of an R1 single-family residential zoning district. The site is an approximately 5,618 square foot parcel with 52 feet of frontage along Beaumont Boulevard with a parcel depth of 110 feet. The site slopes steeply uphill from Beaumont Boulevard with an average slope of 50%. As mentioned, the proposed project would require a specific plan, as any proposed construction within a planned development zoning district requires an approved specific plan prior to issuance of a building permit. A site development permit is required as the proposed construction would exceed the allowable floor area maximum by 226 square feet. Granting the specific plan and site development permit would allow the construction of a 3,324 square foot single-family residence with the 460 square foot attached garage. This would total 3,784 square feet of residence on the undeveloped lot. As shown here is this existing and proposed, so it's undeveloped lot. The applicant proposes a project that minimizes the need for grading and retaining walls to the maximum extent as practically possible, while still complying with zoning requirements related to height, lot coverage, and landscaping. Also, the majority of the proposed staircases have been designed to be on grade in order to minimize grading. The entry floor will consist of a 460 square foot attached two-car garage, a 530 square feet of living area consisting of, as shown on the floor plan, half bathroom, a gym, room, closet, and foyer. Level 1, or as referenced in the staff report, is the second floor. Will include 1,360 square feet of living area that consists of various dining room, living area, kitchen, pantry, family room, bedroom, and a bathroom. In addition, a front-facing deck is proposed on the first level. The second level, or mentioned as the third floor in the staff report, will include a 1,434 square foot area of living that consists of 4 bedrooms, including the primary suite, a walk-in closet, and 3 bathrooms. In addition, there is a front-facing deck proposed on this level. The upper rear patio would terrace at the rear and proposes a wet bar, decorative pavers, lounging area, and in-ground hot tub. The proposed building would be in scale with the surrounding neighborhood, as the overall size and height of the proposed structure is similar to buildings in the vicinity. The proposed building height is 34 feet, which is less than the maximum allowable of 35 feet per the R1 zoning district. The proposed design is contemporary with white stucco and vertical wood-clad siding at the ground level. The second and third floor continue the vertical cladding with complements of glazed windows and 3-panel sliding doors. The second and third floor deck, as well as the upper patio deck, proposes glass railings, and the material changes are cohesive and create articulation in the building. As shown here, the project proposes adequate landscaping, which exceeds the minimum 20% standard required for properties within the R1 zoning district, which is also a requirement applicable to this project as it's zoned as a planned development. Staff finds that the project is consistent with the policies of the general plan and regulations of the single-family zoning district. The project also is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Section 15303, new construction or conversion of small structures, as the proposal is a new single-family residence in a residential zone. Therefore, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project subject to the conditions in Exhibit A of the resolution. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff's available to answer any questions. The applicant has also prepared a presentation and is available to answer any questions.
Okay, I believe now we bring it to the commission for preliminary comments before we open public hearing. Is that right? Before we open public comment?
Yes, for any questions that the commission may have.
To my fellow commissioners, anybody have any questions for staff this time?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. I noticed in the arborist report, they determined that there was questionable soil stability for large trees on the site. If the site does not support large trees effectively, why is this a good site for a house?
Well, I think we're talking about different types of placements on the hillside. Certainly there are geotechnical engineering methods to safely construct structures on a slope like this. The types of structural support, if you will, of a tree tend to be quite different. Often don't go as deep into the hillside, for example, aren't made of the same resilient materials. And so while a tree may be unsuitable on a particular site, engineering methods may allow a structure to be safely constructed.
Okay, I guess my next question is the excavating the foundation for the house as proposed may require reinforcing the foundations of adjacent homes with shoring and underpinning. That seems like a pretty substantial effort and something that we don't normally do. What are the benefits to the town of granting a variance that requires this level of risk on adjacent structures?
Well, in terms of development, this site is intended for single-family residential development. The city's standards do not indicate a prescribed amount of floor area, but it does set a maximum envelope through setbacks, height, lot coverage, et cetera. And the city's regulations set up additional review if a floor area threshold is exceeded to allow just this kind of consideration about potential impacts caused by a development of that scale. What I'll offer is several of these very steep hillside sites in this section of Beaumont specifically have been safely constructed in the past several years. And so I don't know if there's anything inherently related to the floor area that's driving the need to stabilize the adjacent structures, given the setbacks, for example, that are associated with the project. And so I think it's a question that's fairly considered within the context of the zoning, whether this floor area is appropriate, but I'm not sure that issue is directly related, based on the information we have, to the need for shoring or stabilization of the adjacent properties.
Well, I guess what I'm really trying to get out is, anyone talk to the other homeowners? Are they aware their foundations could conceivably be significantly altered if this house is constructed? Have they indicated that's something they're open to? It seems like a pretty big effort if you're talking about moving something a fraction of an inch and having to measure it as you begin to do this very significant excavation. And it seems like, you're in for a penny and for a pound too, that once you get started, it's going to finish. But this is a pretty significant block of work.
I agree, Commissioner Godwin. I think you've identified some of the challenges and complexities with hillside development. Those challenges and complexities are successfully managed all the time by qualified industry professionals, engineers, construction personnel, et cetera. And so I think any likely development of this site is likely to encounter those kinds of challenges.
True, but then you get to the issue is we've recently approved a couple thousand home sites in the RENA study that don't require any of this level of effort. And are nowhere near this steep. What's the advantage to the city of adding one more site with this many complications to the geotechnical work and the foundation?
Well, I think it's a different set of considerations. You're talking about planning for a couple thousand housing units on a citywide level to meet the city's housing obligations versus a very fundamental right to have economic use of one's property. And we're talking about one dwelling unit on one piece of property in this case. And so it's a very different set of circumstances to think about depriving someone of any developable or economic use of their property in the manner that you're describing. And so there are appropriate measures to be taken to allow sites like this to develop consistent with the zoning and with the applicable building code requirements. But a lot like this, certainly it requires more complexity and likely more cost to develop than a site that perhaps didn't have such steep slope or such proximate adjacent structures. Those are considerations and obligations that this property owner is accepting in conjunction with seeking authorization to develop.
To follow up on Commissioner Godwin's question, I guess I have a quick question for staff and perhaps for the applicant instead, so it may be more appropriate to hold it. But how much below the natural angle of repose is this cut proposed to be?
Commissioner Wright, can you repeat the question? How much?
How much below the natural angle of repose is this cut supposed to be to make this what appears the parking structure seems to be the big concern that Commissioner Godwin is expressing?
I'm not sure we have a complete set of plans, but I think packet page 82 might show one example of a section.
It's a 10-foot high wall, and if you look at it from below grade, but it doesn't tell me how far the setback is from both. So to do that 2-to-1 calculation to try to figure out, okay, how far up that wall are we talking about in terms of slope stability? to address that concern.
Right, I guess
Maybe
I'm not,
that's too technical a question to be asking planning.
right, I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. I thought the question was how much of the natural grade is being excavated to construct.
The natural angle of repose has to do with, like, if you drop dirt from the sky, what's the angle that will hold itself up at? And if they're digging below that, how it will affect the building on the neighboring property it's trying to figure out how much are they really undermining the neighboring structure.
Well, I think, in my experience, I've heard it described in different terms, the surcharge perhaps placed by the upslope structure on the downslope retaining wall or other improvements. Certainly, potential surcharge is one of the criteria that an engineer would use to design.
To design
walls.
the retaining walls, yeah,
Right.
but it's the effect of the cut itself, I think, that he's concerned about. After the walls are in place, you can do an engineering calculation on will it hold that surcharge? And of course, that's going to be
Right.
thought of by the engineer and proposed. It's the in-between phase, I think, that he's concerned about. Now, there are ways for us to condition that. We can ask them to do a reading on exactly what is the height of the neighboring building, and then do one once they have their retaining wall in place, and then again 6 months after to see if it moved at all. But my guess is that with the setback in between the two buildings, that we may not have too much of an issue there, just because of the amount of space between the buildings, and it's not that deep a cut.
Right. I do want to point out as well, I'm trying to find the condition number that the conditions of approval proposed by staff, I think it's condition number 4, do specifically call out the excavation and shoring requirements from the California Building Code. If the concern is related to the interim period between the cut and the finalization of the retaining wall.
It's a little different than that. But I'm okay to wait till after I hear what they have to say.
If I may jump in, I noticed the original geotech report was in 2016, and that was updated, I believe, just August of last year to reflecting. Also noticed, I looked at the site, 325 is very similar in slope and scale. I'm just curious, I'm assuming that there were similar foundational issues and grading issues with that same very, very similar design. And also notice 329 is an existing house that appears to have been there for a good fair amount of time. And it upslopes from that point with a very large retaining wall at that, and that is not in the scope of this design, which seems to be a good step in looking at the foundational, the piers, and piers on grade and all that stuff looks quite substantial given the design of it. With that, and I assume 325 is a very similar engineering design, correct? I see shaking her head yes, so thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Redfield. I can't confirm exactly the design or the structural details, but it is a very similar project that was approved. It was a 3,469 square foot, 3-story single-family residence on a similar 5,200 square foot undeveloped lot.
I have a quick question. I was hoping Chair Hauser was going to be here because I knew that she would ask about the trees, but since she's not here, I'm going to go ahead and ask. Do you mind going through the tree replacement requirement? It looks like it's a 4-to-1 requirement, or was it 4 replacement trees? If you could just speak to that. And then also, I noticed in the arborist report that the existing trees, and at the site obviously because they're not there, were removed without a city tree removal permit. And it looks like the city has particular repercussions for that, which may not be met by the site or by the developer. Do you mind just speaking through the history of the tree removal and what's proposed?
I'll take the second part first while Senior Planner Harkusha prepares. The city became aware of the unpermitted tree removal separate from this project and took the appropriate code enforcement action and I believe has resolved that matter in accordance with the municipal code, requiring in part payment of in lieu fees because of the infeasibility of planting all of the trees on the site, but then requiring, I believe, 4 trees to be planted because our city arborist determined that smaller species could be feasibly planted on the site. And so we've incorporated that in conjunction with this project, assuming that it's approved, so that the landscape plan for the project requires those trees. In the event that this project were not to be approved, then we would take the appropriate action to ensure the replanting separate from development.
So that's 4 total trees, not 4 to 1?
Right, I'm not aware of any 4-to-1 ratio applicable to this project.
Sorry, I just remember seeing 4, but I couldn't quite find it. I didn't remember if it was 4 to 1 or just 4 total.
It's 4 total.
Okay. What's the typical tree replacement requirement that we have? I mean, in general, I think usually Chair Hauser asks this, which is why I didn't fully form the question.
Typically for a healthy tree being removed, it's 2 replacement trees and may also require payment of replacement value of the mature protected tree.
Okay. But the payment was already made, Director Murdoch, you said. Given that it's a small site, it looks like the arborist kind of determined that, you know, it wouldn't be possible to plant 2 to 1 tree replacement ratio. Does staff agree with that?
That was the certified arborist's assessment. That's correct.
The city's arborist evaluated this finding by the applicant's arborist and concurred that replanting of large species trees would be problematic and not advisable, but some number of smaller species trees would be acceptable, and so I believe we've specified the Toyon tree as a smaller tree type. It's called out and supported as a tree type in the city's municipal code, and so trying to maximize the opportunity for on-site replanting while recognizing the space constraints as well as the slope constraints. This is the balance that the city staff with city arborist consultation that we found.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, real quick, help me understand. It seems like they removed large heritage trees and we've decided the site is not suitable for replanting the same type of trees?
That's correct, in conjunction with this development. So those trees were present without development on the site. And so given the space occupied by the proposed development and the space that would remain, planting the required number of replacement trees of large species was not recommended by the applicant or the city's arborist.
Given the proposed project?
Correct.
And the trees were removed without permits prior to this project proposal?
That's my understanding. I don't recall specifically whether it was this owner or a prior owner, but my understanding is they were removed some time ago, and I believe this owner was not aware until we brought the matter to his attention.
Okay, that changes my opinion on that. Thank you. I just don't want to set a precedent of, you know, the best way to do it is cut down the trees first and then ask for building later. Okay. Any other comments for staff? At this time, does the applicant have a presentation?
So you'll open the public hearing,
Yes,
Commissioner
I'd like to
first?
open the public hearing.
And yes, the applicant's provided a presentation. I will pull that up.
I'll remind you, just as our previous applicants, you have 10 minutes, but if you'd like, we can reserve you 1 or 3 minutes for a rebuttal if necessary.
Thank you. All right, and just next arrow for each one?
Yeah, please proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you and good evening, commissioners. Appreciate you taking the time to hear me share our design here. And thank you, City of Pacifica Planning Department, for helping us this past year to work through the process. So the owners were here, the Paynes. Unfortunately, their kids
succumbed to their bedtime, so they all had to go home, but they would have loved to have been here for the presentation. Yeah, so the Paynes came to me a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, to come up with a design for this site here. They've been in love the area for a long time, and Bay Area residents. They've recently, they have now 2 children and a family, and are looking to design and build a home for their family. As you all had heard earlier, it is a steep site, and for me, I live in the hillside. The neighboring site that had just been constructed, oftentimes they do require larger foundations for the hillside, and that was something that I really wanted to minimize to the extent structurally possible, to avoid having a huge wall of concrete and a huge 3-story building that stood as a wall at the face of the street. It was remarked earlier, I believe, by one of the commissioners that yes, we indeed wanted to step the house into the hillside to minimize that impact, both visually, but also in terms of having this huge structural wall that would have been required to have been behind the building otherwise. So here's the site plan. In order to give them some space, we did try and extend some of the decks out in the front with the minimal backyard that they had, while setting the building back into the hillside. As it was mentioned earlier as well, we did work with the site, with the steps, to make sure that all the steps were on grade as well. This slide shows some of the challenges of the garage, but we were able to get it back and meet the slope requirements down to the street, as well as the entry foyer on this bottom level here. What we're calling level 1, which is right above grade, is the main sort of public space, or the living room, dining room, kitchen, family room. We do have another guest bedroom that would also double as an office. And upstairs, level 2 is where all the bedrooms are, including the master, the kids' rooms, and they do have a lot of extended family that do come to stay for periods of time. So this section here, I think, is very telling in terms of the strategy for the design. So you can see that average slope, the nonlinear lines below it are showing the natural grade. And you can see how we've tried to set back those foundations in 10-foot increments to reduce the maximum heights of those walls, to work with the hillside, and also to minimize the impact and height of the building by stepping it back. This is a diagram and plan showing the shoring phasing sequence. So it would happen in 5 primary phases to address the hillside, to make sure that it's done safely and securely, starting from the top and working down. This is a rendition. Some of the neighboring buildings are more modern. The clients do like a more modern design. I also try and do what I call contemporary design, which is bringing some natural elements as well to it to soften it up. So in our case, we use a lot of natural stained woods to soften the modern design. And this is the last slide showing that. And with that, I'd like to pass over my time. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we would open it to public comment. Comment card. This is related to an earlier comment, so I don't have any comment cards. If there's anybody in the room who'd like to speak, I'll give them a second.
We have no raised hands at this time.
But he's filling out a card as we speak.
Give the audience a second to fill out a card.
I think you could state your name for the record when you give the comment, and then fill out the card later for
Yep.
staff.
Please come up to the microphone and state your name.
My name is Matthew Astrob. I actually live within 1,000 feet of this home, just above the grade. Just want to say I'm very supportive of this project. I think it's a beautiful home. I saw the design. It's amazing. The only concern I have, and I think this is something that the Planning Commission has already touched upon, is we've seen a lot of erosion in that area. And so we just want to make sure that the foundation, as well as the retaining wall, especially the one behind this house, is appropriate to contain kind of the reality moving forward of the soft soil and the erosion in the water. And I want to see if anybody can kind of touch base on that one to kind of alleviate the concern that I have on that one. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more comments in the room, do we have anybody online, hand raised?
We don't have any Zoom participants right now.
No Zoom participants, okay. I guess it's appropriate to close public comment at this time. Right. We'll bring it back to Commission for deliberation.
And at this point, does the applicant have any rebuttal or any additional you might want to?
Yeah, do you have any additional comments? You've reserved some of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. We're, of course, we're working with licensed structural, civil, geotech. We're actually working with the same prior geotech where there was an approved plan for this site as well, so they know the site very well. And I would like to say that, to the earlier comment about trees or the existing mud stabilization of the soil that's there, the excavation of that soil and the new foundations down to bedrock will vastly stabilize that hillside.
Thank you very much. At this time, I will close public comment, bring it back to the Commission for deliberation.
Can I ask some questions of the applicant?
We need
Yes.
to ask questions of the applicant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you for the renderings, especially. I always appreciate it when there's renderings. I guess to the commenter's comment, which you addressed for the finished condition, do you mind touching on the condition of slope stabilization during construction, and also how the shoring plan will ensure that effectively the remaining soils will not fall downhill?
I'll do my best. And
Sure.
yeah, I did. I always worry about sharing renderings because it always invites so much more comment, but I'm glad that you enjoy them. Yeah, in terms of, I can't speak to it in too much detail because our civil engineer, I only know it schematically. But what I do know of it is I do know that they start from the top and they excavate that portion, they analyze the site, they do secure it structurally, and then they work their way down in the 5 phases. If I could bring this up, I don't actually, for some reason it went off, but I did include that shoring diagram. That's really to the extent I know. I know that that's been a long discussion with the geotech, civil, structural, and myself, and that was, we created this diagram for this meeting to make sure that both the public and the commission knew that our eyes were on that, to make sure that we were not only concerned about the stabilization of the hillside after construction, but during construction, and is why I included that phasing diagram.
Thank you, and I think that's a huge testament to how much thought you and your team are putting into the slope stability issue in this area, because not all planning applications require a shoring plan. I think it's rare that we see a shoring plan come before us. So thank you for preparing that.
Thank you. And we watched the prior meetings even for this site, and we knew that was a concern, and we wanted to hit that head on.
Thank you. Another question. So the storm drain, the stormwater storage tank on site, I noticed that there is not an overflow connection currently. Is there, I know the civil engineer is not here, but is there an intent to have an overflow line just in case that storage tank receives a surplus of flow?
Yeah, I know that was brought up. I actually don't have those plans in front of me, but I do remember that there was a comment regarding that, and I believe that the size of the tanks allow for, once that capacity is reached, there is an overflow mechanism, but I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I know that that was discussed.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question / comment, I'm sure it'll be vetted during the building permit phase, but I noticed there's a hot tub planned for the backyard that will need to drain to the sanitary sewer. Just want to make sure that that's caught.
Thank you, that's noted.
That's all I have for now.
I had one quick question, same on that, you answered my question, thank you, on that, or pointed that. What is the capacity of that hot tub? I'm sorry, do you know the capacity of the actual hot tub, gallon-wise?
Right now, that would, we'll need an additional consultant for that. It was meant to just show schematically at a planning level, but to your point, we could come back with that information.
That'd be appreciated, thank you.
No problem.
Commissioner Wright, I think your light's lit up. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I've got a couple of more questions. There's a significant amount of retaining walls in this project. How are they going to be built, and how are they going to be structurally stable? Are you going to use something like a counterfort, or I couldn't tell from the drawings? How can you talk a little bit about the dynamic and static stability of the retaining walls?
Again, I can do my best at this point. Usually
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. So I know that part of the strategy, at least, was again to, rather than having one ginormous 3-story concrete wall, which you do see occasionally, you know, that was the very intent of staggering or stepping back into the hillside. I know that the, let me see here if I can see on this diagram what they call out there, but there, I mean, if you do see the shoring diagram, they do go through each stage of how they're going to prepare that. You know, my understanding is that, yeah, I don't have the answer, but I know that it's going to be staged, and I know that they're going to do retaining walls at each stage. They're minimized in their height, and I know that the shoring plan does stabilize the hillside to allow for those retaining walls to take place.
Right, but even walls of this height need some sort of structural rigidity. I'm real curious about how you're going to do that, and I think that's kind of key to giving us a level of comfort of how this is being built, at least for me. So if you could send us a letter or have someone on your team send us a letter saying how you're going to do that, that would be nice.
Absolutely.
And finally, the other thing I noticed in this is you're doing some amount of solar, but it also looks like you're piping in natural gas. And given the federal government just last week said they really want to limit the amount of natural gas over the expected life of this house, which I assume is at least in the 75-year range or more. And the state's discouraging natural gas. Locally, there's a lot of people discouraging natural gas. I thought it was a curious choice. Can you expand a little bit on why you chose to include it in new construction at this point?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I encourage with all my clients, especially for heating and cooling, to go the heat pump route. I do know that that is a very efficient system, and it can rely on renewable energy sources. Not that it always starts there these days, but I know in the future it can. And that is what I'm going to encourage for this project. I also know that for many clients, and maybe it's a hard habit to kick, but the range is often desired to be natural gas for cooking. And so I think for the majority of the energy use will be, again, I'm going to encourage, and I think it's a very high likelihood that we will go the heat pump route, and that's going to be by far and large a majority of the energy consumption in the building. So it'll be a small fraction of natural gas for cooking purposes.
I'm finished. Any other questions from commissioners for the applicant?
I have plenty of questions. Along that line, in terms of gas, and particularly for the range and things, while the walls are open, it might not be a bad idea to consider running a wire there. It's cheap while the walls are open, and eventually there will not be gas. You will be forced to do that. So I'm just offering that as an insight. I noticed that the pier height was like 14 feet. I didn't really notice the size of the toe on that main retaining wall behind the garage. It looks like it was tied into the slab. The slab did not appear to be particularly thick to me. Do you want to comment any about the stability of that one particular wall?
Down at the garage level?
Yes.
Let me see if I can go back. Maybe that would help highlight. Does this work here? Can you go back to the section, please?
Are you able to do it now?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I believe you're talking about at this section here where the retaining wall is behind the garage?
When you say here, I'm having...
Oh, sorry, I don't know if here is in...
Yes, exactly. That's the bottom of the house of cards.
Yeah. Again, I can design these schematically. I don't have all the structural answers to it, but I do know that the new California Building Code has become even more stringent for these retaining walls. I think substantially, sometimes even double their requirements. I don't know what the new code is going to require, and then we have the same person who's doing civil engineering is doing the structural engineering. I can get you those answers. I don't have them, though, tonight for that retaining wall.
Okay, and then I really appreciate the fact that, A, you have solar contemplated in this. I really appreciate the fact that you have a catchment for rainwater so that you can use some of that for landscaping. Those kind of green aspects to projects always put a big smile on my face, even if I'm wearing a mask. But I also, on hillsides in particular, and to the commenter's concerns, I share the concern of erosion, the prospect of water, not just surface water. What are you doing to get rid of the surface water, but hydrostatic pressure and things to that effect. So could you elaborate a little bit on what you see is happening to alleviate those concerns of mine?
Thank you. Yeah, I can speak to that. We are putting, well, first of all, drain rock will be behind all of these, encapsulated in filter mesh fabric as well to keep the sand and whatnot out. But then we'll have drain rock behind all of these retaining walls. And at the bottom, it's in this diagram as well. It's a little hard to see. We didn't call it out, but there is a little circle there. And exactly, thank you. The French drains or drainage will be at the bottom behind all of those so that when the water as you mentioned earlier, the subsurface water bears on those retaining walls, rather than creating all that additional hydrostatic pressure, which is horizontal pressure, it'll fall down through that drain rock, hit the drain pipe, and then we're going to bring it out and around and down the house. Yeah.
And do you have sub-slab drainage as well?
I'm sorry?
Do you have sub-slab drainage as well?
Right now, we don't, but we can look at that as well with the civil engineer.
Okay.
Can I ask a?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Sorry, I have a dovetailed question to jump in. I noticed that we've exceeded the normal floor area ratio, and it seems to me that all of the building is sort of consolidated towards the front downside slope of the project, which appears to be almost entirely hardscape. And I was looking through the plans. I couldn't really find a definitive sizing for the storage tank. Normally, we ask those are sized for a 100-year storm. But I don't know if this is a question for the applicant or staff. If someone could point me to where that is in the
I
packet.
thought it was 1,250 gallons.
1,500 is on the plan for the roof drainage tank.
Yeah.
1,500 gallons was this.
And I'm not a civil engineer. Is that an appropriate size for a 100-year storm event for this
They
size?
did come
of
back.
storage
It
tank?
was a plan. It was a comment for us, and we did upgrade that storage tank, and it should be at the entrance.
Yeah, I see the tank
yeah,
on the
yeah.
plans, but staff, was that evaluated as typically with these slope houses in this same area, we've asked for a 100-year storm capacity.
I don't think we're aware tonight of what the specific predicted storm size was for the sizing of that tank.
Okay.
I know it was a planning comment, and they came back to us, and we did upgrade it. I don't have that comment and numbers in front of us, but I know the staff did look at that, and they had us upgrade that tank.
Okay.
Vice Chair Ferguson, in the packet, attachment G, the stormwater calculations are included. If you give me a minute, I could look to try to find your answer.
That's all right. It sounds like it's been addressed to the satisfaction of staff, and if it's in the packet, I just missed it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Wright.
I just lost my, well, here's one quick question. Are you satisfied with the cantilevered deck plan that over time, unlike in Berkeley many years ago, that this isn't going to fall off the face of the building?
It's very much.
Is the rating for the load capacity on that, in case the parents go out of town and those kids are teenagers and they're having a rave and they're jumping up and down, that is still going to be there?
Well, part of my design for all decks now is to build up the deck, and so I plan on draining actually at the surface below. So, yeah, it is clear, that additional attention to detail needs to be made both at the overhang portion where it's resting on the wall below, but also in the drainage at the edge of the deck as well. And we plan on doing those details very rigorously.
Okay, at this time, it should be somebody else that should have a chance to ask some questions.
Any other questions for the applicant from the rest of the commissioners? I have a question, I guess. I'm asking you to speak for the applicant, I suppose. It seemed to me that this was an unusual amount of excavation, and I appreciate the depth of all the engineering that was included. It's far more than we typically get for a single-family home, so it's great to see that. It seems like a thoughtful design, and you've thought through shoring and all the other steps, but I wondered if the applicant might be amenable. This is something we've talked about in the past as a condition for the I can't require the other adjacent property owners, but offering for survey monitoring of adjacent buildings, to do an excavation of this size, this close to the lot line and close to adjacent structures, in order to ensure that no settlement is happening on adjacent buildings. Obviously, this would just be an offer to them, and the adjacent buildings would have to accept the offer. But if the applicant is willing, I could see that as a way to assuage a lot of concerns over this size and scale of excavation in this dense of a neighborhood. I guess my question is, do you think the applicant would be acceptable to offer that service?
I could always speak to the applicant. I just don't know what that entails legally or any other issues, so I couldn't say for them. I could certainly though talk to them about that.
I know when I was reading the geotech plan, they said that was an absolute requirement, that there be monitors on the adjacent houses. And they even quoted a limit, I think, of under an inch.
Correct. Was it a condition of approval that I missed?
I don't know that we put it in, but it's one when we got to deliberations I thought was essential.
I think there are a couple things going on here. Certainly the geotechnical engineer has recommended those particular types of monitoring installations on adjacent properties. We cannot require or authorize that given the property rights of those adjacent property owners, but that's the engineer's recommendation. The conditions do require compliance with those engineering recommendations, but inherent in that is the feasibility to accomplish them. And so we're not able to, again, require that those be installed. So then the next best functional equivalent, if there is one that's not invasive, such some sort of remote survey monitoring, for example, could be accepted as a substitute for that.
Okay, that's what I was dancing around, because I know we've come to that before because of the adjacent property owners.
You could shoot an elevation, and then after the construction is complete, shoot it again, see if it's moved, and then 6 months later, after all the settling has occurred, you could shoot it a third time.
Right, yeah, I understand how it would be achieved, but
Vice Chair Ferguson, just because I had to word find, I didn't remember this from my review, but on packet page 125, it's shoring plan SH1. There's a note number 6 says, the owner's designated agent shall provide a report of its findings from each monitoring to the owners of the neighboring properties and shall provide prompt notification if any material movement has occurred. In such case, the owner will then discuss any necessary protective measures with the owners of the neighboring properties affected. I don't know if that somewhat touches.
that's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, it's in there.
What would we do without you?
Oh, gosh.
I have no other questions for the applicants. Is there anybody else wish to ask anything?
I would just like to make a comment that I'm really appreciative of the design. I think it looks fantastic. I wish we had more of this kind of well-thought-out, aesthetically pleasing kind of projects come before us more often so that we could make the beauty of living in Pacifica available to more people. Thank you.
That means a lot to me, and it's always, like I mentioned earlier, scary to share a rendering because everyone has an opinion, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And if you could pass along my comment that those are two of the best behaved kids I've ever seen in a public meeting. I didn't hear a peep out of either small child for a couple of hours. I was very impressed. I think at this time I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Does anybody look to talk about conditions or make a motion?
I don't know if it's worthy to be a condition of approval because I'm guessing it'll be vetted during the building permit phase, but I do think the storage tank, the stormwater storage tank needs an overflow.
Noted, yeah.
I would support that as a condition of approval. Connected to the sanitary drain, I assume, not just an overflow.
Oh, an overflow
To the storm.
to the, either directly to the storm drain or this site does not appear to be connecting directly to the storm drain, which typically is one of my comments, but I noticed that the nearest structure is fairly far away. It looks like the drainage goes through weep holes to the flow line, is that correct?
I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
I'd have to check with my civil engineer.
Well, either way, I think an overflow is needed for the storm drain storage tank, whether it be connected directly to the storm drain main, in which case I think the entire site's drainage should then be connected to the storm drain main. Or if it needs to connect directly to the flow line through a weep hole, as long as it's sized appropriately, I feel fine with that.
Thank you.
All right, I would entertain a motion if anybody would like to make one. Seeing no further comments.
A motion to approve with the existing conditions. In addition, if we can add Commissioner Berman's, if that's appropriate, Planning Director.
So what I captured was a condition that would read, prior to issuance of a building permit, applicant shall ensure the stormwater tank has an overflow design acceptable to the building official and city engineer.
Thank you. Yep.
I believe we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We'll take a vote.
So please revote. We didn't have enough votes that time.
Strike three.
We're missing a vote again. Please revote.
You get just.
There we go. And that motion passes unanimously, 6 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, so we have next commission communications. Are there any communication from members of the commission?
I have one item. I want to welcome Commissioner Redfield to his first meeting. Also, separately, the plan that we are looking at with the public hearing that, sorry, my brain is going. Pacifica's retaining wall height definition, which is defined from the high end of the retained side to the top of wall. I would like to, at some point, discuss that definition with the commission and the council. When is the appropriate time to review that municipal code definition?
So the appropriate time, in my opinion, would be in conjunction with the comprehensive zoning update. The city ordinarily would have undertaken that work already following the general plan update in 2022, but due to the need to shift immediately to the housing element update process, that work has been deferred. But significant zoning updates are scheduled to be undertaken, starting with the Phase 1 rezoning work and objective development standards that the Commission's already begun working on, and then a much more robust set of Phase 2 objective development standards and zoning updates. So I think it's that Phase 2 process when a broader discussion of objective development standards, potentially including retaining wall height definitions and standards, I think that would be the appropriate time.
Do we know when that might come before the commission, roughly?
I don't have a specific time for you right now, but probably in the 6 to 12 month time frame at the soonest.
Could you take a note of that? I will try to remember, assuming that I am here. I should still be here. But I really do want to talk about that.
Well, that process will include, as I'm envisioning it, an overview of all of the existing zoning provisions applicable at the outset so that we can flag those of interest for further discussion and work. And so that would be an opportune time as well, I think.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more item I'd like to talk about. I've noticed that there are a number of both commissioners and staff with a number of children. I've also noticed that council's meeting times have changed a little bit. I know we all just take it for granted that we meet at 7 and we're going to go to maybe as late as 11, but I would like to have an opportunity to discuss and get input, not just from commission, but also from staff, about what are the preferred hours. I would like to have it be comfortable for parents of small children to be able to serve both now and in the future, as well as for staff to be comfortable to do the same. I'm not saying we should change the time. Maybe 7 to 11 is the perfect time. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I won't be affected. My kids all grown up. But I do have empathy. I do remember those days. And perhaps a 6 o'clock start time might be better and end at 10. I don't know. Unfortunately for staff, and I'm talking mainly about your staff now, they need to be at work in the morning. And I have compassion for that, especially when issues come before us that may run us well past that 11 o'clock deadline. And so I would like to see a way for people to have input in an anonymous way and then have us discuss that and make a decision on that possibly better suits the needs of everyone involved. Just a thought. I don't know if other people feel the same way, but I just don't like to take things for granted all the time.
I appreciate that.
Does anybody want to get into this at 9:52 tonight?
Not tonight, but
Okay.
but
For me, I actually think that the 7 o'clock start time works perfectly because it allows me part of the little bit I get to see my kids every day. It's a nice enough window between work and bedtime that I actually, I get an hour and a half of the 2 hours I get to see my children in a day back to myself. But I'm open to any other suggestions if we want to bring it up later.
I mean, it would be nicer, it would be nice to meet a little earlier if at all possible. But I do recognize that a lot of the issues that we've dealt with in the last year and more than likely in the next year are going to be long-ended meeting times, whether we start at 6 or 7. It'd be great to know how planning staff feels about this, though, because they have to be just as early the next day as all of us, headed to our respective jobs. So
that's certainly something that could be agendized for a discussion or an informational update on some of that information at a future meeting.
Is it possible to perhaps request from staff that they figure out some anonymous way to get input from staff so they're not necessarily looking bad by saying to their boss that they'd rather have it at an earlier time, for example, so that then we could hear that input?
I think, Commissioner Wright, that to the extent that the commission's interest in inquiry affects the staff, that's an issue I need to work through with the city manager. I think what we can consider at some point when resources allow is to perhaps bring an informational item to the commission about how other city and other cities' commissions handle their business in terms of start times, whether they have fixed end times and the like, so that there's a range of information to facilitate that kind of discussion for the commission.
Yeah, and of course we need to consider the availability to the public and what time is good for them as well, but I just don't want to start as a baseline of this is the way it's always been. Is this necessarily the way it always has to be? That's all.
Right. I mean, I'll just, we should probably end the discussion there at this point since it's not an agendized item and bring back more information in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Any other commission communications? We'll bring it to staff for staff communications.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ferguson. I just want to remark on one item, given the level of public interest and the quarry reclamation plan application that's under processing currently. That item had been continued as a public hearing to May 6th. We have learned that we will not be bringing the item on May 6th, and so I wanted to share that with the commission and the public. We do anticipate potentially bringing a study session item at the applicant's request on May 20th, and so there hopefully will be a more open dialogue in terms of questions and answers and so forth on issues related to reclamation at that time. So that's expected to be the next public input opportunity on May 20th.
Could I query the wisdom of doing that at the same time as the applicant? Didn't we just push that continuance on to the 20th too, so we'll have more than one item? Do you think it's good to have more than one item on, when you include the quarry on anything?
It's not ideal, but we do have some meeting management challenges, and this is among them, so we'll have to encourage the commission to conduct its business efficiently that evening.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no more communications, next item is adjournment, right? Do I have a motion?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
That motion passes unanimously.
Oh, gosh.
Free of the public.
That was my